tough because there is a huge power imbalance between these two people, between Stormy Daniels and Donald Trump. And Susan Necheles, who is this lawyer, who's the female defense lawyer.
The best lawyer Trump has.
The best. But she has really been just trotted out for this Stormy Daniels cross. So I think it'll be really interesting to see. I read some reporting from people who were in the courthouse who said that perhaps the jury did not love her beating up on the witness. And I've read other reporting that there have been other cases where she's been hard on female witnesses. I'm not sure that plays in the way she's hoping it will. Again, this is a jury case, so you have a jury to appeal to.
Mark, how hard do you think Trump's team is going to go after Stormy Daniels, especially when you think about his demands on his attorneys and all the gory details she went into yesterday?
I think they're going to be pretty aggressive. I think that that's what Trump wants. I think that that's what he expects. And I think that they feel that there's enough credibility holes in the testimony to take it apart. And particularly when you have the judge himself questioning whether or not some of what her testimony should have been included, which just throws up flares for everybody about whether or not it could be appealed.
To that very point, we heard a lot of graphic details from Stormy Daniels. Trump loyalists, we know they're going to side with him no matter what. But what about independent, the gettable voters out there? Do those dirty details hurt Trump, or maybe even the reverse?
I don't think that at the end of the day the dirty details matter at all. Everybody's familiar with what likely happened. And, the only surprise that if he paid her not to have sex, right? That's what they define problematic. But Molly said, at the end of the day, does any of this legal stuff matter in the election? And I think that in an election that could be decided by 10, 20, 30,000 votes in 3 states, we do know that if he, no matter what the, people say this is the weakest case, blah, 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 at the end of the day, there could be a defense out there. I don't like about, voting for somebody who's found guilty of any crime.
Right.
No matter what it is. And that could be
that high of
that could be enough.
Yeah. But you're also trying to convince evangelicals that they should stick with this guy after he...
Molly. We're not even. They're with him.
Mike Pence
great. And their argument is God chooses strange messengers. They have already figured out why and how they can reconcile being with Trump, and they ain't leaving. Joyce, if you're the prosecution, what are you hoping for in what happens with this cross-examination? What are you hoping Stormy does?
Well, you're hoping that she'll actually be even better on cross-examination than she was on direct. That's a phenomenon that you see sometimes with a witness who's being pushed heavily on cross-examination. And sometimes, they will simply grow a spine and dig in and become very insistent. Because you'll recall, Steph, in opening statement, Trump's lawyers said that what Stormy Daniels would testify to was a lie. And now the burden is on them to deliver on that promise. And if she holds up well on cross-examination, it really makes inroads into their credibility.
I feel like what is left for her to tell us, but the prosecution has made it clear they're going to redirect. What else do they want to get from her?
Well, they'll clean up anything that happens in cross-examination. If she falters, if she gets cut off from explaining something, they'll be able to redirect her attention to make sure that the jury is focused on the evidentiary points that they need them to be focused on. Stormy Daniels' testimony is interesting, I think, in this sense that people view this as a case that, in addition to having legal consequence, also has political consequence. But the prosecution needs to prove the elements of the case. And a big one is to convince the jury that Donald Trump was a part of this scheme. And the fact that Stormy Daniels' story is something that would have been so damaging to him had it come out ahead of the election, that's an important thing for the jury to understand.
Joyce, you kind of lit a candle of hope today for a whole lot of people who are feeling hopeless. And you said, you wrote that after 25 years as a federal prosecutor, you have faith in the jury system no matter what happens. Why?
Look, that's not to say that there aren't sometimes juries that go astray, but by and large, 12 Americans possessed of common sense and good attention spans will reach the right result in a courtroom. And what happens is we're observers. We're able to read the transcript in this case. Sometimes we're able to watch trials on TV. but the jury is there for every minute of the proceedings. They hear the witnesses. They take instruction from the judge on the law. They can evaluate the witness's demeanor on a first-hand basis. And they take their job very seriously. Juries are not cavalier about the responsibility. In this case, I expect that they're paying close attention, that they'll deliberate carefully, and that they'll reach a verdict based on the evidence, and that if prosecutors do their job, they'll convict.
All right, I know I'm bombarding you with questions, but turn to Georgia with us for a moment, Joyce. An appeals court there now might disqualify Fani Willis. If she would have recused herself months ago, would we be in trial territory at this point?
You know, it's tough to say. There are so many variables here, but the reality is that what the Court of Appeals in Georgia will do is they will decide whether or not the trial judge, Judge McAfee, got it right. They're reviewing his decision. They will accord him broad discretion. I think it's unlikely that they'll reverse him. So the real issue here is the amount of time it will take. It'll probably take months. And then, of course, whichever party loses in the Court of Appeals will almost certainly take an appeal to the Georgia Supreme Court. So it's less the ultimate outcome of this case and whether or not what Fani Willis did was correct at the beginning. This was always going to go on this appellate path once the issue arose. And it's unfortunate. You know, I think we all have views about why we got here, but the reality is this case is now delayed severely.
Delay. In Florida, delayed indefinitely. Now, Georgia, it has been a rough few days for Jack Smith and Fani Willis. Mark, do you think we are going to see any progress here before the election and after the election? Do you think these trials are ever going to happen?
Well, I don't know. But, I mean, the key question is anything going to happen before the election? And I think the answer is no. The days of magical legal thinking are over. The cavalry's not coming. The legal cavalry is not coming to the rescue of Joe Biden, which is, I think it's good. I think voters should focus on the election. The way to beat Donald Trump is not in court ultimately, but at the ballot box. That's the way you humiliate him. That's take away his power, take away his standing with voters, and do it legally, do it straightforward at the ballot box.
Look, these are the guardrails not holding, right? This is a guy who spent $100 million, the New York Times said $100 million to punt these cases. He's hired the best lawyers. I think we're still going to see this criminal case, the New York case, but I don't know that we'll see any other cases.
Did he hire the best lawyers?
Well,
or is Aileen Cannon in his pocket, and did he get wildly lucky in Georgia? Come on.
I would say he's
Alina Habba, the best lawyer?
No, she is not the best lawyer, but he's had Todd Blanche is a pretty good lawyer. I mean, he's had some pretty good lawyers, and he's also had millions and millions and millions of dollars. And so he's managed to punt a lot of this stuff. I think he also got lucky. And I think the Supreme Court, I mean, you listen to those two justices, Thomas and Alito, they have really done for him what few thought they would.
Then let's talk politics, Mark, because we now have two Democratic senators who are now publicly going after Aileen Cannon. And I completely get why they feel that way. But is it a gift to Trump for politicians to weigh in? Because he loves to argue that all of these cases are rigged. It's all about politics. It's Democrats pushing the DOJ.
Yeah, the more for him, the better. I mean, who would have thought, if on paper a year ago that a nominee for a major party would be indicted 4 times, 91 counts, and be stronger after all of that than he was before it. And so for Trump and his base particularly, the more partisan it gets and the more partisan the attacks are on the judges, it makes their point. It makes judges' point. It says they're coming for you, they've got to go through me. And it's just a partisan attack.
How about tomorrow when Trump goes back to court? Rick Scott of Florida is going to be by his side, the latest contestant in the Veep sweepstakes. What do you think about this?
Well, I mean, everybody's trying to shine his shoes, as close as
I haven't seen Melania show up. Yeah, so
or
I'm not
Don
sure.
Jr. or Ivanka.
Not everybody's trying to shine his shoes. Not his wife, his firstborn daughter, his firstborn son. So I wouldn't say everybody's showing up.
Well, everybody trying to be vice president.
Nikki Haley.
Right.
Yeah.
Everybody that wants to be in the Oval Office next to Donald Trump.
huge, complex case involving billions of dollars in fraud, complicated financial instruments, international currency exchanges, and a whole lot more. It was a first-of-its-kind case for the Justice Department and for the judicial system that would hear that case. And it took 10 months for that case, with all of its myriad complexities, to go to trial. Sam Bankman-Fried was indicted in the month of December. By the following October, he was sitting in a courtroom. As it turns out, that is a fairly standard amount of time for major cases. In October of 2017, former Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort was arrested and charged by Robert Mueller in Washington, D.C., for money laundering and failing to register as a foreign agent. Mueller followed that with more related tax and bank fraud charges in Virginia a few months later. So, 2 high-stakes cases involving the former campaign manager of a sitting U.S. president. But even with all that, the time from Manafort's initial arrest to the first day of his first trial in Virginia was just 9 months. Manafort was arrested in October, and by the following July, he was sitting in a courtroom facing a jury of his peers. Oath Keepers leader Stewart Rhodes was charged by the Justice Department for carrying out a seditious conspiracy against the United States on January 6, 2021. Rhodes was arrested in January of 2022. By that October, his trial had begun. And that was not an easy case for the prosecution by any means. Seditious conspiracy charges have only been brought a handful of times in our nation's history, and to mixed results at trial. But by November of 2022, just 11 months after the Justice Department first brought those charges, Stewart Rhodes was convicted.
These convictions were the result of tireless work by Justice Department agents, attorneys, analysts, and support staff, beginning in January 2021 with a methodical collection of evidence and continuing through the presentation of that evidence during the 7-week trial that began in October of 2022. Their skill and dedication are in the very best tradition of the Justice Department, and we are all extremely grateful to them.
11 months from arrest to conviction. Today, it has officially been 11 months since Donald Trump was indicted by the Justice Department on 37 counts related to his alleged mishandling of classified documents at his Florida beach club, Mar-a-Lago. 11 months today. Previous high-profile criminal cases, highly complex cases, novel cases, cases involving Trump's allies and his loyal followers, they have gone to trial in 9 or 10 months. By 11 months, some of them had already reached a jury verdict. But here we are, 11 months out for Trump's arrest in the classified documents case, and we still have no idea when it will actually go to trial. The case was originally scheduled to go to trial later this month, and we have been waiting for the judge in that case to set a new trial date for more than 2 months. But last night, Judge Aileen Cannon, instead of setting that new date, delayed the trial indefinitely. This is from Cannon's order released yesterday. The court has evaluated the statutory factors set forth in the Speedy Trial Act, including the public's interest in the efficient administration of justice. Upon such review, the court finds that the ends of justice served by this continuance outweigh the best interest of the public and defendants in a speedy trial. Translation, speedy trial be damned, I'm pumping the brakes. So mark this trial in your calendars for the 57th of February. This also means that now both of Trump's federal criminal cases are indefinitely delayed. Remember, the Supreme Court has put Trump's federal election interference case on ice while we await its ruling on whether Trump can claim presidential immunity from criminal prosecution. Tomorrow, the court is expected to issue new rulings on cases it heard this term, but nobody really expects the justices to issue a final ruling on Trump's immunity claim yet. And also, the court can wait another 2 months if it decides to, if it issues a final ruling at all. There were several indications from several conservative justices that they would like to kick the presidential immunity case back to the lower courts for further review, which would mean even more delays. And now today, yet another one of Trump's criminal cases is facing a potentially indefinite delay. That would be Fulton County District Attorney Fani Willis's conspiracy case against Trump and 14 co-defendants. That case was heading to trial until one of Trump's co-defendants tried to get DA Willis disqualified because of a romantic relationship with her lead prosecutor. In March, Judge Scott McAfee allowed DA Willis and her staff to remain on the case as long as her lead prosecutor resigned, which he did. But the judge left the door open for Trump and his co-defendants to appeal. And this morning, the Georgia State Appeals Court said that it will consider that appeal, meaning justice delayed. Again. Now, for the past 3 weeks in New York City, the nation has seen that it is possible for the former president to sit for a criminal trial during an election year, that the system of justice can, in fact, manage the novelty of the first American president sitting trial just like anyone else. But the delays in his other cases raise serious questions about whether Donald Trump's status as a former president and a current presidential candidate are slowing the wheels of justice at precisely the moment when his status as a current presidential candidate should be the reason for a swift resolution to these cases. The American judicial system can move with relative alacrity on complex financial crimes and seditious conspiracies and foreign election interference. So why not now? Joining me now is Melissa Murray, a law professor at NYU and co-author of the recent book, The Trump Indictments, The Historic Charging Documents, with commentary. Also with me is Anna Bauer, courts correspondent and legal fellow for Lawfare. Thank you, ladies, for being here tonight. Melissa, it doesn't seem like a coincidence that all of the Trump trials have been delayed with the exception of New York. Can you disabuse me of the notion that somehow these judges are giving him preferential treatment?
Well, I know Donald Trump likes to say that he has been treated poorly relative to other defendants, but certainly no other defendant in America has been allowed to sort of play out the system in the way that he has. And, the immunity case, I think, is a really great example. As you say, he is running for president, which means that if he is actually entitled to criminal immunity, he would want to know that right now, rather than labor with this sort of Damocles of criminal liability over his head. And instead, he seems perfectly happy to let the Supreme Court take its sweet time in deciding this issue. And you're right. I think it's very unlikely we're going to get a decision from the court tomorrow. The situation in Georgia, I think, was similar. That was a case that really was moving and had considerable momentum. Remember, in September and early October, we saw Kenneth Chesebro plead guilty. We saw Jenna Ellis plead guilty. We saw Sidney Powell plead guilty. And again, that's how a RICO case is supposed to work. Yeah. They plead all the way up the chain. Suddenly, Michael Roman comes in and is like, Nathan Wade, Fani Willis are having a relationship. It's not the kind of ethics quandary that typically we really focus on. Usually we're concerned where...
Welcome back to Scrap Science. It has been quite some time since Scrap Science uploaded a video. I think it's been a few months at this stage, but as of today, we're back making content for at least a little while. Maybe a couple of months, I don't know, we'll see. Anyway, straight into it. Quite a while ago, we made a video extracting the sulfuric acid from a dead car battery. And that's what this acid here is. I assumed in the video that it was around 35% sulfuric acid, but a lot of people in the comments have told me that that's probably not true. Since the battery is dead, a lot of the sulfuric acid will have reacted with the lead plates during the battery charge and discharge cycle to form lead sulfate, which depletes the concentration of the sulfuric acid quite considerably. So we're going to measure the concentration of our sulfuric acid that we obtained today and see if it is actually a reasonable concentration or not. And more importantly, in that video, I stated that the sulfuric acid that we extracted from the battery contains quite substantial lead contamination. There's a lot of lead dissolved in the sulfuric acid. So this, to me, was quite alarming because, well, lead is just something you never really want to work with if you don't have to. I mean, it's poisonous. You can't put it into the environment, and any experiments that you do with it inevitably get contaminated with the lead that's actually in the sulfuric acid, and then it's very tricky to dispose of and everything like that. So it'd be really nice if we could remove the lead out of this acid. Now, obviously, the easiest way to get rid of the lead is just to distill the sulfuric acid. I mean, that'll get rid of all of the impurities pretty much and leave you with pure, concentrated sulfuric acid. I'm not prepared to do that, though, and I assume most of my viewers are probably not quite prepared to do that either, so we're going to have to find some other way to remove the lead. Now, you might think there'd be some way to precipitate the lead out of solution. So we could add some kind of anion to the solution that would precipitate out the lead as an insoluble salt. However, it's really hard to find anything that will selectively precipitate the lead without reacting with the sulfuric acid itself. So, avoiding distillation and avoiding precipitation, what are we left with? Now, quite a few people in the last video suggested, quite rightly so, that electrolysis would be a good way to remove the lead from our solution because our sulfuric acid itself is electrochemically inert under electrolysis, and the lead contamination is in the form of lead 2+, which is easily reduced on the cathode in electrolysis. So if we electrolyse our solution, we should just get lead metal plating onto the cathode. Lead metal is very easy to deal with. It's definitely a lot easier to handle and dispose of than any salt of lead. It's also much less poisonous as well. So this is a win-win. We get pure sulfuric acid roundabout, and we get to remove the lead as a very non-toxic form. So we're going to give that a go. We will take a 200 milliliter sample of our sulfuric acid in just a beaker, and we will electrolyse with some carbon rods and see just how much lead we can remove from the solution. I don't think we'll be able to get all of it out, but we're going to give it a go anyway and see how much lead we can actually remove from the solution. And of course, so that we can quantify our results, I have bought some lead testing strips so that we can actually measure the concentration of lead in our original solution and in our final solution. And there we are. I have the carbon rods in the solution ready to electrolyse with. We have our sulfuric acid straight from the battery. And I'm about to put around 3 volts across the cell, so turning that on now. Yep, that looks like it's got it. As you can see, we have hydrogen on the cathode, we have oxygen on the anode, as we expect from the electrolysis of sulfuric acid, and if we wait long enough, we should be able to see lead forming or plating on the cathode. I don't see any point to running the cell with a high current density or even a high current for that matter. So what I've done is I've just limited the current to 150 milliamps, I think. I think that should be plenty to plate out our lead. I'm going to leave the cell running for maybe 24 hours and we'll see how much lead we've removed. And final thing, I've put it in this box to contain any splatter from the cell or any spills or anything. All in all, we are pretty good to just leave this running for, well, 150 milliamps, 24 hours. And again, we'll just see how much lead we've removed in that time. Okie dokie, the cell has been running for around about 27 hours now at 150 milliamps. The anode, well, the original anode I had to replace because, well, the graphite fell apart, which makes sense. We are electrolyzing a solution of sulfuric acid and graphite falls apart under those conditions. So this is the original anode here. It just disintegrated completely. So what I'm going to do now is, I think that's enough time, 27 hours to run the cell. I'm going to filter all of our resulting solution and then we will get to measuring the lead content. Alright, so what we have here is, this is our filtered solution that we have electrolyzed. So hopefully we've removed some portion of the lead from this. Here we have our electrodes. Now, a bit of a problem we see straight away is that the cathode that we've been using for electrolysis for 27 hours, we can't really see any lead forming on that. I'll maybe try to get a bit more light on that. Yeah, there we go. There's a slight colour change. You can see where it dipped into the solution, only just here, but that's really not looking like lead metal or any kind of shiny surface on the graphite. So it's a bit of a worry that, you know, we haven't actually removed any of the lead from the solution, but it is possible that the lead may be plated out as lead dioxide on the anode, which we definitely wouldn't be able to see because you can see how much that anode is falling apart. So who knows, maybe we have removed some of the lead anyway. Now what we really want to test here these two beakers that I have here. In this beaker we have a solution that is 100 times diluted of our original acid. Now this has been neutralized as well. Same thing for this beaker, but this is our electrolyzed solution diluted by a factor of 100 and neutralized once again. So what we can do with these is I have some lead testing strips, as I've said, and we can test both of these. I don't think these strips will give very accurate measure of the lead in each one, but it should give qualitative results. Hopefully it'll be able to show that our final solution has less lead in it than our original solution, so we'll give that a go. Okay, here we have the two strips. You can see they test a lot of things, but we're only measuring lead content, and that is measured by the end square on each one. That should go more purple as there is more lead in solution. So I'm going to go and stick these into their respective beakers, and we will see how purple each one goes. Yep, I think that's a pretty obvious colour difference there. Well, there we go. It seems like, according to our lead testing strips, by electrolyzing our solution of sulfuric acid, we were able to reduce the lead content by a factor of about a half, which isn't particularly impressive because, well, half the lead contamination really isn't that much of a big impact.
It is often diluted and contaminated with a lot of random junk, and in this form it isn't all that useful. Most reactions involving it require it to be somewhat pure and often concentrated, and the dilute stuff that you can find in drawing cleaner just isn't going to cut it, so today I'm going to show you how it can be purified and concentrated, but first I have to find a source of it. You see, sulfuric acid, due to itself being very reactive, is hard to create by an accessible chemical reaction in a reasonable quantity, and the most viable option for getting it boils down to extracting it from an over-the-counter product. As I said, it can be recovered from some professional drawing cleaners, but they are not sold everywhere. Fortunately, there exists a source of it that is available almost anywhere, while being decently pure and concentrated, and that is a car battery. It all comes down to how batteries work, because each conventional battery requires something called an electrolyte, which is the carrier of electrical charge, and it just so happens that in most car batteries, this electrolyte is 37% sulfuric acid. This means that if I got a car battery and extracted the electrolyte from it, I could then purify it to obtain my precious sulfuric acid, and I actually have one that I randomly found in the back of my garage, and it will be just perfect for this. However, before I start doing anything, I have to thank the sponsor of today's video, Squarespace. Squarespace is an all-in-one advanced website creation platform specifically designed to make entrepreneurs stand out and succeed online. Squarespace allows you to create incredible websites with ease, whether you're just starting out or managing a growing brand, and use them to sell anything from various products to your time or engage with your audience. Squarespace offers amazing features like their powerful Fluid engine, which allows you to really unleash your creativity and make your dream website idea come true using their best-in-class website templates and easy-to-use interface. Squarespace also provides you with the ability to connect dozens of extensions to your site to extend its functionality, or their useful analytics tools designed to help you discover many important details about your business. For a free trial, check out squarespace.com, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/amateurchemistry to save 10% of your first purchase of a website or domain. Anyway, the battery that I ended up finding turns out to be in quite a good shape, and it doesn't look like it's been used before. It is also pretty small, and the larger ones are much more common, but as long as it's a lead-acid battery, it should work for the extraction. Other types of car batteries often don't contain any sulfuric acid, so I had to make sure that this is a classic lead-acid electrolyte battery. Except for the sulfuric acid, it also contains plates made out of lead and lead dioxide, which makes this whole thing very good at storing energy, but I won't get into much detail on how a battery works here, and all that matters is that it has the sulfuric acid I need. Also, one important thing to do before starting the extraction is to measure the battery's voltage, because when it runs out of charge, most of the sulfuric acid just turns into water, so to get all of the juice out of the battery, it has to be fully charged. Fortunately, my one is, because it's still quite new. Before starting the extraction, I also wanted to wait to later see how much acid I managed to get, so I got it onto this random food scale that I found, and it currently weighs 10.5 kilograms. Okay, now to finally begin extracting sulfuric acid, I removed the label from the battery, revealing these 6 plastic screws which close the 6 cells of the battery. I unscrewed them and started pouring the electrolyte out into this steel pot. It was really satisfying seeing this liquid gold flow out of the battery, and there was much more of this stuff than I anticipated, so to get more space in the pot, I drained some of the electrolyte into a beaker, which resulted in a pretty large splash. Fortunately, I was prepared for something like this to happen, and quickly got everything under control. In the end, I was left with 2 full beakers of some really cloudy electrolyte containing a lot of stray lead, which I will have to remove. But before that, I wanted to take a look at the now empty battery, which has lost almost 3 kilos of weight. I wanted to tear it apart to show you its insides, which turned out to be way easier said than done, and after struggling with this thing for like 3 hours straight, I managed to open it up. As I said, it is composed of 6 cells with some lead and lead dioxide plates in them. I actually plan to recover the lead and do some experiments with it in the future, but now it is time to take care of the electrolyte. To get rid of the insoluble lead, I quickly filtered everything using a cotton filter, leaving me with some nice and clear electrolyte along with some grey lead dust. The electrolyte still contains trace amounts of lead dissolved into it. It is also not too concentrated, and I can check that by measuring its density and using this handy-dandy online concentration chart. It is now only about 35%, which makes it good for some reactions, but for the majority, it has to be more concentrated. When it comes to concentrating it, there are 2 main options. The first one involves just boiling it down on a stove, which is incredibly quick and simple, but it produces a ton of incredibly nasty fumes, which makes this method viable only outside or in a powerful fume hood. Also, the thought of having some hot concentrated sulfuric acid just boiling in the open like that kinda scares me. That's because while cold and dilute, sulfuric acid is not too dangerous, and I can even touch it with my finger without feeling anything. Hot concentrated sulfuric acid, on the other hand, is by far the angriest chemical I have ever worked with, and just a drop of it could burn a hole in your skin in seconds. Anyway, when the sulfuric acid finished boiling, I let it cool down. Despite being concentrated, it is disgustingly yellow and contaminated with some lead. So while this method is quick and easy, I will now show you the real method on how to obtain some pure sulfuric acid. It involves distilling it, which leaves all of the impurities behind and results in pure 98% sulfuric acid. It actually can't get to 100% because it forms something called an azeotrope with water, preventing it from getting more concentrated, but 98% is more than enough for pretty much every application. This method, however, has a slight drawback because sulfuric acid boils at a whopping 337 degrees Celsius, which means that a good heating element has to be used, as well as the setup has to be robust and not hacked together from some junk, because you have to treat hot concentrated sulfuric acid with respect. Fortunately, I have a heating mantle that can reach high temperatures, as well as enough glassware for a proper distillation, and to start, I first have to get some boiling chips. You see, sulfuric acid on its own has a tendency to boil very inconsistently in big bursts, which is incredibly dangerous, so to mitigate that, some boiling chips have to be used which allow for even boiling. They can of course be brought from a supplier, but there is no fun in that, so I decided to make my own from this broken beaker, which I ground in a mortar and added to a flask. I also added some old and demagnetized Teflon coated stir bars because after doing this procedure many times, I found out that they also help with the boiling. As the last thing, I wanted to add some sand for good measure, so I stole some from this random sand pile in the middle of nowhere and washed it with some hydrochloric acid to clean it up just like in the silicon dioxide video. I then added it to the flask, followed by about 700 ml of the filtered electrolyte. I didn't measure the exact amount of it here and went with a good rule of thumb, which is to always fill flasks only to about half their max volume to prevent any accidents. I then assembled a simple distillation apparatus and greased the joints with some concentrated sulfuric acid, which is pretty much the only thing that can withstand this harsh distillation. And I know that this is a bit counterintuitive, but you can get this starter amount of acid using the method I showed earlier. I also used just an air pump for cooling here because using water would result in such a large difference in temperature that the glass might crack. Anyway, when everything was ready, I covered the flask in aluminum foil to insulate it and started heating it. After about an hour, some water started coming over. It had a neutral pH which will increase as time goes on because some of the acid goes over along with it, which makes this process not perfectly efficient. While this is cooking, let me tell you about a chemistry supply shop that provides me with many chemicals, BM Chemistry. BM Chemistry sells a lot of hard-to-get reagents along with laboratory equipment and lots of other things, so you can check out their page, to which there is a link in the description. Anyway, for a few hours, mainly water came over, and when the volume of the electrolyte decreased sufficiently, I swapped the flask for a smaller one. As you can see, the acid is now really yellow for some reason, and I continued to distill it for a few more hours. As time went on, the distillate got more and more acidic and some scary looking vapors appeared in the apparatus, and to know when I would start collecting the sufficiently concentrated stuff, I often checked the distillate with a piece of paper to see if it was getting dissolved. This is because only very concentrated sulfuric acid has the ability to eat through organic stuff like paper or sugar, and when the paper started getting consumed, I started collecting my product in the small flask. After about 6 hours, the acid stopped coming over, so I stopped the heating and got my product. I also disassembled the apparatus, leaving me with some weirdly white and cloudy lead sludge. Also, before checking my acid's concentration, I had to process the rest of the electrolytes, so I just repeated the whole distillation process 4 times, which took more than forever and left me with a ton of some nice and for some reason ever so slightly yellow sulfuric acid. In the end, I managed to make slightly over 850 grams of it, which is really cool. I can't precisely measure the yield, but I would guess that it is something like 80% based off the electrolyte. I also measured the acid's concentration and it came out to be almost exactly 98%, which is insanely cool, and I am really surprised by how well this whole thing turned out. Okay, and now when it comes to the properties of this acid, it is a pretty viscous liquid that heats up very much when diluted with water, and that's why you should always add it to the water and not the other way around like you see here. It is also of course very acidic, and what's funny is that it can't just eat the pH paper because it also just so happens to be a dehydrating acid, pulling water from many organic things like paper and sugar, leaving behind pure carbon structures and giving off a lot of heat in the process. As you can see, it gets much angrier when concentrated, while hot it is also an oxidizing acid, being able to slowly dissolve precious metals like copper, and as I said in the beginning, it's just incredibly useful and I would definitely use it in a lot of future videos. Anyways, I hope that you guys enjoyed this short project, and you can consider leaving a like or subscribing to my channel. You can...
Oh crap. Now I'm all out of whiskey. How am I going to get any more?
I have the door open and the heat coming off this water is like standing in front of a dishwasher when you first open it, and all that steam comes out. Like, it's fucking hot. Hello. Do you hear it? Pelting my house? Steam rain.
Kenny. Oi, Kenny. Kenny. You are ignoring me, aren't you? Ignorer. Hey, you never look at the camera. Kenny, did you mooch the second food last night? Kenny. Wait. Tree your foot again. Kenny? Look up here. Oh, no. Kenny? You are ignoring me, aren't you? Ignorer. Hey, you never look at the camera. Kenny, did you mooch the second food last night? Kenny. Oi, Kenny. You are ignoring me, aren't you? Ignore. Hey, you never look at the camera. Kenny, did you mooch the second food last night?
The sun is normally blazing this time of the morning, but it's fucking gray and foggy and pouring in onto my balcony. Listen. I'm just going to assume that this is my body's attempt to play catch up with whatever the fuck was wrong with me. Oh, look, it stopped raining, mostly. The cicadas are back. I can hear them. I don't think you can, but I definitely can. I'm just going to assume that this is my body's attempt to play catch up with whatever the fuck was wrong with me. Oh, look, it stopped raining, mostly. The cicadas are back. I can hear them. I don't think you can, but I definitely can. No, I had a doctor's appointment a couple of days ago, and I went in, and they were like, all right, well, your payment is $198.04, and I was like, wait a second, I have this insurance right here. And they're like, yeah, but that insurance won't cover until you've already paid the $10,000 deductible. And I'm like, I don't see $10,000 worth of doctors any fucking year. So basically, I pay for insurance just to turn around and have to pay for a doctor's appointment when I could just as easily not have insurance, which is like $500 a month, and I could instead pay out of the money that would be going to insurance. How does this make fucking sense? Basically, this one single appointment for a month would have cost me $700 because I'm not only paying for insurance to cover it, but the insurance doesn't actually cover it. So I'm paying an additional $200 to actually go in and be seen. What the fuck, man?
This compound forms beautiful blue-green crystals. It is also a useful oxidizing agent. Copper acetate is created by mixing either copper hydroxide or basic copper carbonate with acetic acid. I start by weighing 10 grams of basic copper carbonate. Then I disregard caution and start dumping 5% acetic acid. About 300 milliliters later, I start mixing the solution. As it mixes, more and more copper carbonate is reacting with the acetic acid. I will now place this on a magnetic stirrer and heat to fully react. I really enjoy the color of this compound, so I'm going for a double batch. I first add some more acetic acid.
York with our special coverage. Stormy Daniels back on the stand this morning in Donald Trump's hush money trial, facing additional cross-examination right now from Trump's attorney about her allegation of a sexual encounter with Trump and a subsequent cover-up.
NBC's Yasmin Vasugian is outside the courthouse, and here with us for the morning, Charles Coleman, civil rights attorney and MSNBC legal analyst, and Temadayo Aganga-Williams, former federal prosecutor, former senior investigative counsel for the House January 6th committee. So, Yasmin, take us to inside that courtroom. What's happening right now?
Already pretty contentious, to say the least. It seems as if Stormy Daniels is much more prepared this morning than she was Tuesday at the start of her testimony then, especially when it came to cross-examination with Susan Necheles. A lot of back and forth at the very get-go. It seemed as if it was as contentious as it was the first go-around. And what I mean by that is Susan Necheles asking repeatedly, was this just about money? Were you just looking for money? And, of course, guys, I'm paraphrasing here. And Stormy Daniels repeatedly saying, no, I was not. Just to give you kind of color from inside the courtroom, Stormy Daniels wearing a green dress this morning with a black sweater going down to the floor. Her hair is down, seeming more relaxed, according to some of our reporters that are inside the courtroom. There is a back and forth going on when it comes to, for instance, the lead up to the payout of the $130,000. And Susan Necheles brings up this moment in which it seems as if Stormy Daniels was angry, quote unquote, furious, as Susan Necheles puts it, about the fact that the money had not been paid out. The negotiated payout had not been cemented as of yet. And we now know, obviously, the former president was trying to delay that, hoping that he would either win and or lose the election and would not have to necessarily pay out this $130,000 towards Stormy Daniels. Stormy then subsequently asked, what are you talking about? When Susan Necheles said, weren't you furious? Weren't you angry? Weren't you calling Keith Davidson names, your attorney at the time? And she said, what are you talking about? I'd like to see this evidence. So let me read for you some of what they played for the court today, a conversation between Keith Davidson and Michael Cohen about this, guys, in which, and there, by the way, are some expletives there, so I'm going to skip some words. I just didn't want you to get caught off guard. This is Keith Davidson speaking, and I wanted to let you know what was going on behind the scenes, and I would not be the least bit surprised if you see in the next couple of days that Gina Rodriguez's boyfriend, remember, Gina Rodriguez is Stormy Daniels' agent at the time, goes out in the media and tells the story that Stormy Daniels, in the weeks prior to the election was basically yelling and screaming and calling me a P word, and you can guess what that word was. And Michael Cohen says, can I ask you a question? And Keith Davidson says, no, hold on one second. I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if he comes out and says, you know what, Stormy Daniels, she wanted this money more than you can ever imagine. I remember hearing her on the phone saying, you blanking Keith Davidson, you better settle this story, because if he loses this election, and he's going to lose, if he loses this election, we lose all leverage in this case. It's worth zero. And if that happens, I'm going to sue you because you lost this opportunity. So settle this blanking case. And then they go on because they bring up, guys, the NDA, right? The settlement, the $130,000, and the point of which there's an exchange between Necheles and Stormy Daniels. And I'm just going to read a bit for you, and then I'm going to throw it back to you because I know there's a lot to talk about here. There's a settlement agreement, Necheles says, between two parties. You cite a few things that will be agreed to. Prior to entering the agreement, there is confidential information relating to the defendant in this case. And Daniel says yes. The next paragraph that they're looking at, you say you have been damaged and you were going to have to release claims. I did this, Stormy Daniels says, because my attorney suggested that I do. And then they go on. This is the parties agreeing it would be kept confidential, and you refer to it as an NDA. Yes, this is the confidentiality agreement, right? Necheles says. Daniel says Yes. Again, this is getting, guys, and I think we're going to see a lot more of this in the cross-examination, which is likely to go on for the next couple of hours because they go on. This is getting at the credibility issues of Stormy Daniels. One thing, though, that I will note in some of this cross-examination that we're seeing that I mentioned earlier on is she seems much more prepared. She's droning on less, giving kind of yes or no answers, listening to the questions from Susan Necheles, understanding, right, that Susan Necheles kind of might have some moments that she's going to bear out. And we heard from Donald Trump earlier today, seeming as if there are some moments in which Susan Necheles plans to kind of play out for Stormy Daniels that could catch her off guard. So she seems more prepared for many of these exchanges going into this, but certainly going to be lots of fireworks today throughout this cross-examination and then moving on, of course, to redirect.
Former President Trump is now speaking outside a Manhattan courtroom before Stormy Daniels resumes her testimony in his criminal hush money case. Let's listen.
Mr. Trump, what do you think of Judge Cannon's order?
Are you happy to close her?
Thank you very much. What Biden is doing with respect to Israel is disgraceful. If any Jewish person voted for Joe Biden, they should be ashamed of themselves. He's totally abandoned Israel, and nobody can believe it. I guess he feels good about it because he did it as a political decision. You have to do the right decision, not the political decision. But he did a very bad thing. I just want to let you know that we've just filed a major motion in the appellate division concerning the absolutely unconstitutional gag order, where I'm essentially not allowed to talk to you about anything meaningful that's going on in the case, and many good things are going on with the case. It shouldn't have been filed. They had this morning the top legal scholars in the country. This is a Frankenstein case. They took a dead misdemeanor, they attached it to a dead alleged federal felony and zapped it back into life. So many of us are just amazed to watch this actually walk into court, because it's not a recognizable crime that any of us have seen. It's Jonathan Turley. I've been doing this for 60 years, and I don't understand what crime he's been charged with. Nobody understands this. I just don't get the crime. There's no evidence of any crime whatsoever. This is a sham. That's Alan Dershowitz. And these are people that they speak their minds. They're not for me. They're for justice. This is another one. This is without precedent in American history. Only with the desperation of President Joe Biden and his fanatic left-wing enforcers did it become possible to think about arresting and jailing their major political opponent. This case must be taken out of Judge Merchan's hands because he's totally conflicted. Judge Merchan is totally conflicted, like probably no judge has ever been conflicted before. Here's another one, Manhattan DA Alvin Bragg. His prosecution of former President Donald Trump violates both the federal and state constitutions. This is a prosecutor making it up as he goes along. Due process worthy of the names does not tolerate that. So these are statements. This is Andrew McCarthy made that statement, highly respected. Judge is allowing wide scope of information that has absolutely nothing to do with the case. That's Rebecca Rosewood on Fox News. Today we have Rick Scott here, Senator Rick Scott. We have other politicians here. We have many people in support. The outside of this building is closed down like Fort Knox. Nobody's ever seen. We have so many police down here, New York's finest, and they are New York's finest. They're just told what to do, but they don't have them at Columbia. They don't have them at NYU or any other places. This is like an armed camp down here, and you have nothing to worry about. Believe me, your problem is from the left, it's not from the right. Big problem from the left. It's from within our country. That's a bigger, in my opinion, a bigger danger than China or Russia. You have it from the outside and you have it from within. From within is a bigger danger to our country, and it's from the left, not from the right. But Rick Scott's here, and he said you can't go after political persecutions. This is a shame. This should not be happening in our country. And Senator Ted Cruz put out a very strong statement about attacking Donald Trump and the American voter. It's an attack on both. This is purely and simply election interference. There is no case. So that's the way it is, but here we sit after 2.5 weeks, and I think you'll see some very revealing things today, and I want to thank my lawyers. They've done a very good job, but I'd rather thank them after it's over as opposed to now, because we don't want them to get carried away. There's no case. Should have never been brought. Alvin Bragg didn't want to bring it. Cy Vance didn't want to bring it, and he didn't. He left. He didn't bring it. Everybody's looked at it. Southern District didn't bring it. Federal elections didn't bring it. It's also a federal case, not a state case, which they're not allowed to do, but these are minor details. So I just want to thank you for being here, and we'll see you later in the afternoon. Thank you very much.
What do you think of the Stormy Daniels testimony?
That's former President Trump getting ready to head back into Manhattan courtroom today, again blaming...
Wearing a T-shirt of Donald Trump behind bars in cuffs. And he's begging his followers to get to 1 million followers, and he's begging for subscribers. And he made a very big announcement, in my estimation. He says, wait for it, he's running for Congress. Okay, and you can be alarmed or, amazed by that, but then consider some of the people we have in Congress, and anything could happen. But
I didn't heard that.
That was the big announcement last night. I saw it live. He seemed to be in earnest, and the disparity between what Michael Cohen is doing and the gag order that they're challenging here is so stark that I actually think that the president might get some movement.
All right, Kennedy, your thought here? The former president has also been backed by the ACLU because this really is a free speech issue. And, regardless of how you feel about him politically, anyone should have the right to express their opinion about what they feel is a gross injustice at the hands of aggressive prosecutors. And, the president's supporters feel like that's what he's seeing across the country. It's very interesting because the people in the media who hate him, they always try and abstract their hero who is going to destroy President Trump. At first it was Michael Avenatti, and now he's in prison for stealing money from Stormy Daniels after he represented her, and she's back on the stand again today. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that she's going to do as well as those haters hope. I think that she could crumble like a snow cone on an 80-degree sidewalk.
Well, how about that? Well, we brought you guys in to talk about the migrants in Denver who are making a list of demands, and apparently some of them have been met. And we brought you to talk about a worm in RFK Jr.'s brain. But that's going to have to wait for another day.
Heck. I had some brainworm talking points.
I know you did. Thank you, Kennedy. Thank you, Paul.
I'm Steve Dusan. Into a false sense of security. History shows the prisoners succeeded in duping staff. 38 broke out of H Block 7. Half were recaptured almost immediately. But today, the Northern Ireland office say 12 are still on their missing list. IRA leader Larry Marley headed the group which planned the escape. He himself didn't go out and was later shot dead by loyalists. But Marley's co-conspirators in the planning of the escape did make the break. The plan was simple. Armed prisoners were to take over the block, hijack a food lorry and drive out the front gate. Few inside H Block 7 knew of the escape plan. And as key figures began a process of conditioning prison staff into lowering their guard, eyebrows were raised at the sight of hardliners apparently going soft. Many were surprised to see convicted killer Brendan McFarlane cleaning floors as an orderly and drinking tea with prison staff.
Yes, I mean, I'd help crews with the crossword puzzles or talk to them and ask them about football, etc., etc. Some people had it, maybe were a wee bit taken aback that, so soon, we're moving into this new regime and this new era, and a wee bit too palsy-walsy, but obviously you can't go and tell people, look, the only reason I'm being palsy-walsy is, there's equipment coming in here, and what we need is a bit of peace and quiet. We don't want these guys going mad, or there's an escape coming up. You can't tell people that.
The prisoners set out to take over the control area of H Block 7 at gunpoint. The 6 men carrying pistols were under no illusions about their role.
No Republican prisoner would have been issued with a firearm unless that Republican prisoner was clear about his total commitment to the success of the operation.
Even if it meant killing someone?
Whatever that entailed. Whatever that entailed.
And they would have been prepared to do that?
they would have been prepared to do anything that would have made the operation a success.
After Sunday lunch, 7 orderlies, 6 armed with pistols, moved into the circle. Other prisoners took up positions close to staff guarding the wings, or stood next to alarm buttons to prevent their use. The signal to overcome the guards was a shout from McFarlane for a bumper, prison slang for a floor polisher. They'd rehearsed their moves the 2 previous Sundays. The control room was protected only by a locked grill door. The security door opened against regulations for ventilation purposes. Jerry Kelly pointed a gun through the grill at the officer inside. When Kelly's attention was distracted, the officer moved to close the door. There was a struggle to prevent him. 2 shots were fired, and the officer was wounded in the head. But by then, the remaining 23 officers had been overpowered. As the wounded officer got treatment, the captors had become the captive. The taking of H Block 7 lasted just 20 minutes. Once the prisoners had taken over H7, they waited for the food lorry which they planned to use as transport to the front gate. The officer driving was tied to the seat and told a hand grenade was attached underneath. An armed prisoner covered him from the floor of the cab.
When the lorry arrived, our man on the gate let the lorry into the block. When the lorry stopped, we arrested the driver and we told him that we were using his lorry to effect the escape of Republican prisoners, and he was driving it. We put him through a fairly intense psychological couple of moments to assure that he was likely to carry out all of our demands. As it turned out, he did. When the lorry arrived, and the lorry driver was properly briefed, and we then loaded the prisoners on to the back of the lorry. The last prisoners to go onto the lorry were those who were dressed as screws, because they would be forced out to effect the next phase of the operation.
The lorry, packed with prisoners, was waved through 2 internal security gates without searches before it reached the prison's main entrance. This was where the IRA's plan started to go wrong. They'd intended taking over the tally lodge in order to have control of the main gate. But a delay in the arrival of the lorry meant they drove right into a staff shift change. For a time, more than 20 prison officers were held by armed terrorists at the tally lodge, but as more staff arrived, the plot was uncovered and the alarm raised. Prisoners still in the lorry made a run for the gate.
Well, the lorry was stopped between, I guess it was between 2 gates, which is a toll area or something to that effect. As far as we were told, the vehicle was going to be leaving the prison grounds. It didn't. Obviously, something had went wrong. It was pretty much pandemonium. Everybody just piled out of the back of the truck, and it was every man for himself. People were taking cars. People were running. There was a lot of confusion because there was guards coming on. There was actually prisoners dressed as guards.
It was during those clashes at the gate that prison officer James Ferris was killed. He was stabbed with a screwdriver, but a post-mortem established that he died of a heart attack. Officer Ferris was already wounded when he ran to the front gate to warn colleagues an escape was underway.
So he tore off out of the gate lodge, shouting to the prison officer manning the pedestrian gate, lock it, shut it. I don't know what he shouted, but something to that effect, because prisoners are escaping. And it was while he was running away that another prisoner came up after him, and I think when he got pretty near the gate, stabbed him again, and he died. And the prisoner went on to stab the officer at the manning the gate, and indeed I think a third officer who was just coming in the gate, he stabbed him. So Ferris's actions with his wounds and everything else were extremely courageous. And I must say that the officers at the gate lodge we reckoned, behaved extremely well.
16 prisoners were later cleared of murdering prison officer Ferris.
Well, our view was simply that the law of the land is the law of the land, and judges will decide what is right in law. Prison officers never do anything else but accept the law of judgment as it is. We were aware that Mr. Ferris had a heart condition. We were fully aware of that. He was medically examined not long before that and cleared for his work. So at that particular time it was causing no difficulty with his employment. What brought about the difficulty was, in the Tally Lodge, when he was trying to make the move to get assistance, he was jumped upon and he was stabbed. It was the shock of that stabbing that exacerbated the heart problem and caused his death. So in reality, the judge, as the judge ruled at the trial, saw the charge of murder inadmissible. But one always has that thought in the back of your mind that had Mr. Forrest not been stabbed, Mr. Forrest today would have been alive and with his family.
In Northern Ireland, as a major search operation got underway for the escaped prisoners, the prison's minister, Nicholas Scott, was off duty, relaxing with his family at his London home.
I remember I was watching David Fearty, who was on the charge and in danger of winning a major championship, I may say so at the time. And my stepson came charging downstairs and saying, Nick, half a dozen fellas have got out of the Maze prison. So I immediately got on the phone to Stormont to find out what was going on and lost track entirely of David's performance, but I think for both of it was downhill from there on.
As Nicholas Scott was packing his bags for Belfast, 15 of the escapees were quickly recaptured in the vicinity of the jail.
A lot of lads made it sort of that way and the other way, but 4 of us came across here. I climbed this gate and went down the road there. So there was myself, there was Joe Simpson, Peter Hamilton, Sean McClinchy. The 4 of us were moving here. We had to be cautious. We heard the alarms, we heard the shooting, we were very excited. We knew what we had just achieved, but we knew there was also a lot in front of us. When we got to this point, we spotted the bridge. We seen the RUC in the bridge and we went down, the 4 of us. There was screws in the bridge, there was RUC in the bridge and the British Army were there. We had to move across the field to get to the lagoon. That's actually quite deceiving, it's very deep. So we were able to go into the reeds there and head in onto them because the helicopter was up, the RUC were in the bridge, the screws were behind us and we had actually nowhere to go. And what we hoped to do then was wait there in the darkness and possibly move along the side of the lagoon. Within a short period, an RUC man spotted a movement there. He alerted the rest of them. They all aimed their guns in our direction and called on us to come out. We came out, we put our hands up then. One of the lads actually said, one of us shouted, don't be shooting, we're unarmed.
Within days, 4 others were recaptured in the Castlewellan area. Paul Anthony Kane and Brendan Meade were arrested on a deserted country road. The police filmed Hugh Corey and Patrick McIntyre surrendering after a siege at a house in the Moorlands. 19 other prisoners, many dressed as prison officers, did get away. 4 of the escapees used a prison officer's car to ram the prison's external gate.
2 other prisoners ran away the opposite direction, of course, and I followed them. I couldn't catch them. I thought one of them was a prison guard. I wasn't sure. I mean, it looked like a prison guard was running after a prisoner. That was my first impression, but when he turned around, his hat blew off and I could see it was just another prisoner, but I couldn't even catch them up. They got too much of a head start, so I cut through some houses that were just right beside the gate, and I hid in some shrubbery.
I made my way up along with about 5 or 6 others up this laneway. There was a small farm up there. And when I got up into the farmyard, there was a Mercedes sitting there and a Volkswagen van. So 8 of us took the Mercedes and drove off, come down the lane, turned up a small road, and then we moved out onto a dual carriageway, searching for the Murray roundabout.
And my memory at this point, I always remember was in my head, I didn't really understand why the Brit was not shooting. And it was only later on I actually sussed that obviously what he was looking at was as far as he was concerned, screws fighting screws. I knew that the M1 was to my right. It was too far away. I thought the M1 would be blocked off. I knew that to the left there was roughly about a half a mile up through the Brit camp. I expected that they would now know that the balloon was up, that they would be on guard. And what was behind me really was freedom. I was outside the perimeter wall. All that was between ourselves and open countryside at that stage, about past, I think it was the governor's car park behind us, was about 30 yards and then 9 feet of barbed wire entanglements.
Meanwhile, McFarlane, with another group of escapees, had taken over a house near Drumore and held a couple and their 3 children hostage. They concealed their hijacked Mercedes in the family's garage.
I do realise that it is a traumatic experience when people come into your house. What we had to do was to try and reassure the people that we didn't intend them any harm. We actually told them who we were. Now, they were very, very upset and they were very tense. They were very, very nervous, which is understandable. So we spent a bit of time trying to reassure them, calming them down. I got one of the lads to make tea and a couple of sandwiches and that, and we just sat and we explained that we only wanted to be there for a couple of hours and we wanted to be totally and utterly out of their lives as quickly as possible. And slowly but surely they began to come around a wee bit and settle down.
There was a Jeep shortly thereafter had parked practically on top of me, so I just laid low. I could actually listen to their conversation, and I was afraid to breathe even, for fear that I would draw attention to myself. And after they left, and after people had come off the streets and went into their homes, then I went looking for some clothing to put on because I was starting to get cold.
So where did you find the clothing?
Well, I tried neighborhood cars in the neighborhood, and everybody, of course, security conscious, had locked their cars, so nothing was open. But I found a shed that the lock wasn't completely closed on, like a tool shed. And when I went in there, I found a woman's cardigan, and I found a number of bikes that were in there. And I took one of the bikes out of the shed, and then I decided, what the hell? I just got on the bike and rode the bike past the gate. I came out, and the only way I know back to Belfast.
So you actually drove past the gate that you'd run through earlier?
Yeah, they were actually still working on it. They were still reconstructing it, I guess. The car was gone, but they were fixing the gate. I mean, it was closed over, but I could hear them working on it.
And no one gave you a second glance?
No, not at all. There was actually a couple of kids sitting in the neighborhood that I said hi to as I rode past them on the bike. So there was no...
So where did you go on the bike then?
Well, I got arrested at the bottom of that road. I'm not too sure what the road's called, but it's the one that leads up to the Long-Kesh prison. And I was asked for identification, which I didn't have, of course, and I made up a name and told them I was from the university area, around Botanic Gardens, and they took me in, but they wouldn't let me bring the bike with me, because I said it would save me some of my trip. And the police officer was insisting that the bike would stay at the roadblock, so they brought me into Lisburn Police Barracks.
I had my own clothes in under the prison uniform, or the screws uniform, which become very heavy, and I zigzagged up the hill thinking I was on my own. And so halfway up the hill, and you're running up thinking you're going to dodge this and that, you look around to see what's coming behind you, and when I looked around, there was like 40 following me. No, he must have thought I knew what I was doing, but I mean, I didn't know what I was doing any more than anybody else.
Kelly's group eventually made it to the home of a former Republican inmate.
We made contact with the prisoner fairly dramatically. Actually, he was watching match of the day when we landed in, and was shouting his name in the middle of the house. He lifted about 4 feet off the sofa. But he went away and got us put up in a house. And then went away to get some help, because what we expected was there'd be a lot of raiding. We didn't come in sort of quietly. It was sort of, people would have noticed the uniforms. I mean, I was half dressed with just one shoe on, one shoe off and all that. So it was like a lifetime. But I suppose after about 20 minutes, somebody came along and said, well, I've just got a car with you. I said, well, yeah, there's a car. And there was about, at this stage, there was 5 of us had been in the car, you see. And, yeah, we'll have a car. Where is it, And we had been going to throw the keys away, but we gave him the keys. And we only heard this later on. What happened is the guy went out, the guy drove the car down till right beside the border. It looked like we had crossed the border, and as far as people were concerned, and the authorities, we were across the border.
Well, we had established earlier on in the evening that they were a good Christian family that had been talking about their church hall and about prayer meetings, etc. So I felt that to avoid, if possible, any of the other options that we had put to them, that if we could get them to take their principles and put their principles in the line and swear on their principles, that they wouldn't go to the police for 72 hours, that we would accept it. Now, I know it's a long shot, and a lot of people wouldn't go for it, but the dilemma was that, I didn't want to leave anybody behind. I didn't want to take anybody from the house with me. And the other option was simply, I didn't want to tie them up, obviously, but if they were prepared to swear on the Bible, then I was prepared to accept that. And I gave her the guarantee that if they did that, that nobody would be harmed or nobody would be taken from the house, nobody would be taken away.
So how did that come about? I mean, did they physically bring a Bible into the room?
Yes, they did okay. They had the family Bible and they opened the Bible. And she talked with her husband and she told the children what the situation was and they all agreed. So they just swore on the Bible that they wouldn't go to the RUC for a period of 72 hours. And I said that I was very happy with that. And absolutely. There would be no problem. We would just leave the house quietly that evening.
The family, after consulting with their minister, kept their part of the bargain. Now, did you take anything from the family?
Yeah, we took a number of things. We took some food. Not a lot. We took some food. We took 2 rucksacks. And we put some cheese and potato bread and soda bread. Took a couple of small knives, some biscuits, chocolates, some milk, orange juice, and a couple of bottles of water. We also took some heavy clothing, like sweaters, tracksuit bottoms, and I think, yeah, the 2 young lads had a scout map and a small compass. We took those as well, and a radio.
So you stole these actually from this family?
No, we didn't steal them at all. You know, the object of the exercise was simply that we needed this stuff to get out into the fields. We needed food, we needed that. So I wrote them a receipt for whatever they took. I took an inventory of everything that we took, and I signed it, and I gave it to the woman in the house, and I told her that in the event that she was prepared to go, she would obviously have to go to Belfast, that she was prepared to go and contact the Republican movement, that because of the signature and because of the list of stuff that was on it, that they would reimburse her to at least a relative value of what we had taken.
Not surprisingly, the inventory was never presented for payment. When you were inside Lisburn police station, then what was going on around you as you sat there?
There was a lot of activity. I was sitting in the waiting area, and there was the hatch which all the activity was taking place. There was a lot of officers running back and forth. I even think I seen one that I recognized from when I was taxi driving, a regular RUC officer. I was pretty scared, but I thought I'd given up the ghost. I pretty much thought that I was just waiting to be taken into another room, or I thought I was waiting for detectives or something. I don't know what I was, why I was left sitting there. When they came back and the 2 officers that brought me in came back and told me that they were taking me, it was time for me to go, and they were taking me back to the roadblock. I was really suspicious then. I didn't know what was going on. I thought there's a kink to this, But
so what conversation did you have with those officers who had taken you into custody?
Well, I asked them, various questions to do with the escape. Acting, a curiosity seeker. Have you caught anybody yet? And, what's going on and who escaped and how many are there of them and, that type of thing.
What were they able to tell you?
Nothing really. They pretty much didn't see any activity from what I could gather. I think they were the late shift that was coming on that were, stuck at a roadblock, which was pretty boring and humdrum for them. So that's the impression I got. I could be wrong.
How can you carry that kind of thing off? You must be...
I don't know. I honestly don't know. I guess just nerves, adrenaline, I don't know. There's something. St. Jude,
Art claims he cycled on to Belfast before going to America. An RUC spokesman said there was no evidence whatsoever to substantiate Art's story. Kelly and 7 others, meanwhile, took refuge under floorboards of what they considered a safe house.
The floorboards were very small, very low. The floors were very low. It was full of rubble and all that there. We got sleeping bags down. You couldn't shift. The height would have been sort of like the width of your shoulder. So that's as far up as you'd go. People were very good. They then got us down, because this was the same night of the escape, they got us down radios, were earpieces. They got us down the papers, so we were able to find out what was going on. And they sent us down a sealed bucket that we could urinate in or whatever. We would have went up to go to the toilet or have a shower for the first couple of days, but then again took it upon ourselves to say, look, well, it's not a good idea, we'll just stay down. We didn't expect it to be 2 weeks, but it was actually 2 weeks that we were in this.
The first night, on the Sunday night, I would say that after about 2 hours walking or so, we had just got into the fields. And there were a couple of jeeps come past. We were just inside the field, a couple of jeeps come past, but they didn't stop. I don't even know if they were UDR or soldiers or police. That was the only thing on that night. There was absolutely nothing. We just got a free run the whole first night, right through to about 5 o'clock in the morning. It moved only at night because during the daytime, I mean, if people spot you, I always found that, McElwain told me that in times, or if people spot you, farmer will spot you 3 or 4 fields away. You know you're strangers, and you could pass on a remark to someone else. I've seen a couple of boys up there, so just moved at night so that nobody would see us at all, and stayed in during the day.
And did you walk to the border?
Yeah, the whole way.
People in the house cover your presence. I mean, of course, presumably they would have had visitors calling at their home.
Oh, that's right, and they did have visitors calling, and the way we covered it was, I mean, they would sort of knock on the floor, if anybody was coming to the door, and then it would just be complete silence. I mean, that's the rule we had. You didn't talk. When we spoke anyway, throughout the whole 2 weeks, we spoke very quietly. I mean, that was a general rule. And the people went out and went about their business. Their nerves must have been totally wrecked, After 2 weeks, contact was made, and it was decided after some conversation, that people would move out in twos, one night at a time. And that was put in motion to go across the border.
Security forces north and south mounted a massive search for the escapees. None were found. An inquiry was set up into what went wrong at the maze, to be headed by Sir James Hennessy. Nicholas Scott, who had been responsible for prisons for less than 4 months at the time, was under growing pressure to resign.
It was one of the more difficult times of my political career, as you can imagine. I took the view that if any decision I'd taken, or failure to take a decision, during that period, that was my responsibility, had contributed to this escape, then I would think I would certainly have felt it necessary to resign. And indeed, I offered to Jim Pryor to resign if necessary. He took the view that we were in it as Secretary of State and the Minister responsible together. We would wait for Sir James Hennessy's report. If any blame was put at our door, we'd have to reconsider our position. But until he had reported, there was no question of resignation. Indeed, that would in itself have further contributed to the self-satisfaction of the IRA.
Sir James, who began his investigation the day after the escape, was quick to identify lapses in security procedures.
Despite the 17-foot-high perimeter, 2,000 yards long, and an inner fence 16 foot high, and the prison divided into segments and blocks and gates and all the rest of it, despite all that, the key weakness was at the main gate out of the wall, where the people controlling the gate were in a rather flimsy wooden building to which anyone could have access from inside the prison. Now that's unheard of. You'd never see that in a prison in England. So that was a real weakness in the physical security. It was known to the authorities, and they were going to do something about it, but they hadn't got around to it. The second physical weakness was in what was called the circle within the H block itself, where the key man who controlled communications with the prison control room and the gate and all the rest of it was in what was supposed to be a completely secure area with bulletproof glass, a steel door and a steel grill. He was in there and should have been impregnable, not being able to have got at. But to communicate from his inner sanctum with the staff outside, which he had to do, it was necessary to open the door. And indeed, in order to live in that area for any length of time, he had to open the door, we were told, because there was no other way of getting air in. It wasn't air-conditioned. So at the time of the escape, that inner door was open, and only the grill door was there. So it was possible for one of the prisoners who had a gun to point it through the grill and shoot him, which again, that was a key weakness. So there were those two key physical security weaknesses. In addition, there were all the normal security procedures which you would expect to have been followed and which were all laid down as being there for the staff to follow, many of which had not been properly followed.
Hennessy was shocked to find that IRA leaders in H7 had been appointed orderlies, giving them crucial access to the circle area.
And they managed to get at least 3 of their leaders, IRA leaders, believe it or not, appointed as trusted orderlies. I mean, it's absolutely incredible to an outsider who knows that an orderly ought to be a trustee, that you should have this sort of man appointed as an orderly. Shouldn't have been allowed.
And the use of such people was totally against the NIO rules, which you're aware. Orderlies should be low-risk prisoners who are unlikely to escape or become violent.
Of the 19 men who got away, 3 are now dead. Seamus McIlwain, Patrick McKierney and Kieran Fleming were shot by security forces in 3 separate incidents while on what the IRA describes as active service. Gerard Kelly and Brendan McFarlane were arrested in Holland and extradited after a lengthy court battle.
Are you able to prove your innocence now, immediately? No.
Kelly was returned by the Dutch only on the basis that he should not serve the remainder of his life sentence for bombing London in the early 70s. He was sentenced to 5 years for his part in the breakout, but served only 13 months after his period in Dutch custody was taken into account. He's now free. McFarlane has not yet been given a release date. Gerard MacDonald was arrested in Glasgow along with the IRA gang responsible for the Brighton bomb. He is currently in prison in England. For 3 of the Maze escapees, it was a case of escape to Alcatraz, the once notoriously tough prison island off the Californian coast at San Francisco. It's here that Jim Smith, Kevin Barry-Art and Paul Brennan built new lives for themselves since they arrived illegally 8 years ago. Today, however, all 3 are back behind bars in separate prisons, awaiting the outcome of extradition proceedings, but where the warmth of the sun is matched by the warmth of the welcome.
Political refugees have a right to remain in this country, and it's my firm belief that Jim Smith is a political refugee.
Jim Smith's public defence lawyer expressing a view widely held in Irish America. And in such circles, Smith enjoys a celebrity status. And thanks to bail on health grounds, he's even managed to attend meetings of supporters of the 3 escapees, known in San Francisco as the H Block 3 Committee.
On the 27th of September, when Jimmy's trial starts, we're going to have rebuttal witnesses to the British claim that there is no repression against Republicans or nationalists or ex-prisoners in Northern Ireland. And we'll probably have Father John McVeigh, Neil Blaney, Ken Livingston, and Bernard McCaskey coming over.
We've got some really great people coming, and a lot of them would prefer not to stay in hotels. So if anyone's willing to have people like Bernadette or...
Have you ever been to Northern Ireland?
I haven't been to Northern Ireland, no, but I have been to Ireland. But I have not been to the north. I plan to go to the north sometime this next summer and try to see for myself.
You're making judgments about Northern Ireland, but you haven't been there.
Yeah, it is perhaps strange.
A condition of Jim Smith's bail is that he must wear an electronic bracelet which transmits a signal to the sheriff's office. It triggers an alarm each time he leaves his home. So his every movement has to be agreed in advance.
I'm going to work tomorrow, Michelle, at 7:30, 6:30. That's Friday, and also Saturday.
Once the sheriff's office knows his daily itinerary, Smith is free to resume his life, working as a painter and decorator.
If I go with, I'd say like a 100 feet radius, with the monitor's position now, there will be an alarm will go off, and that goes down the telephone line to the federal building, an alarm will go off down there. The people would check the books down there to see if I'm supposed to be away, and if I'm not, they'll call the house. They check to see what's going on. If there's no answer at the house, they will inform the United States Marshals.
Would it have been easy for you to cut that bracelet off and get away again, run?
I could cut this bracelet off, leave it here now, and take a hike. What good is it going to do? I'm going to be on the run again. I'm going to go back to square one. I told the federal judge last year, my running days are over.
After arriving in America, Smith got married, got a new identification, and managed to obtain an American passport, which enabled him to make 3 trips back to Ireland. He was arrested by the FBI as he left for work on the 3rd of June last year, at exactly the same time, on exactly the same day, as Kevin Barry Art was taken into custody in San Diego. But precisely how Smith and Art's secret lives were uncovered isn't quite clear.
There was a so-called friend of mine from years ago come into the Los Angeles area. He's been trying to make contact with me through my brother and through other members of my family. He knew I was in America somewhere, but he wasn't sure where. And he was asking my brother Martin, where is he? You know, I'd like to go and meet him and have a drink with him. And all he said was, listen, I don't know where he is, and I'm sure if I did, I wouldn't tell you anyway. He was living in Los Angeles, and he came up here for a painting job. And I bumped into him in a bar, one of the local Irish bars. And it just went from there. He knew me from he was about 14 years old. He got on the telephone and started calling his people back home that he had met me, using my real name down the phone, to Belfast. Everyone in Ardon knew it. And it was through these phone calls back home, I say that the RUC, the British government, got onto me. They sent the fingerprints over to the FBI and informed them that one of the escapees is living in the San Francisco area.
They say they caught me, they found me because of fingerprints that were on file with DMV for an auto sales license. But I've since learned that that's not the reason how they came upon Smith and myself. Apparently, some female who was having an affair with an agent knew of Smith and mentioned Smith's name to the agent, and the agent, of course, started an investigation. And they got on to Smith first, and because of the tie between Smith and we had adopted the identity of dead twin brothers. They got connected. They found me in San Diego. And so they watched us they watched Smith for something like 6 months and watched me for 3 to 4 months before they actually finally arrested us.
Whatever the truth, the FBI was reluctant to offer a clear insight into their timely detection.
There was a request from the British government. We initially made some effort to locate some of these fugitives by a fingerprint check, which was initially unsuccessful. However, we did a California state check, which was successful in identifying where Mr. Art was. And then we subsequently identified Mr. Smith through the same fingerprint check. They were both charged with passport violations in conjunction with that.
Now, they both escaped from the Maze prison 10 years ago, and were living here for some years. Certainly in one case, Jim Smith's case, for something like 8 years. So,
that's what I understand.
When was the request made for you to trace them?
I don't recall the exact date of the request. I know that we.
Was it 10 years ago?
I don't remember, but I know that we made an additional effort through the state fingerprint check. The initial check countrywide was not successful.
There's a great deal at stake in the Jim Smith extradition trial here in San Francisco. It's the first test of the new treaty between the two countries involving a fugitive from Northern Ireland. And so far, rather than simplifying and speeding up the procedure, it's giving the defence an opportunity to effectively place the British government on trial.
The 1986 Supplementary Treaty removed certain offences from the category of what was called the political offence exception. Those offences are murder and bombings and related offences. In addition, it added a provision which permits a limited inquiry by the court where the fugitive is found.
The treaty provides that if the requested country, in this case the United States, feels that additional evidence is needed for the judge to be able to make a decision on extradition.
Welcome back to my channel, everyone. Sreetips here. What I have is a brick of gold, and to hold it like this is very impractical. I mean, who am I going to get to give me 120 grand for a single chunk of gold? And we've got 1,603 grams That's 51.5 troy ounces of pure gold. If you want to see how I poured this bar, I'll put a link in this video to that video. But for right now, what we're going to do, we're going to put this bar in a big 5-liter beaker here, carefully, so we don't break it. To begin this experiment, I'm going to add some hydrochloric acid. And we'll just cover this thing with some hydrochloric acid. That's about 750 milliliters of hydrochloric acid. I've got everything all set up. I've got a separatory funnel up here with about half a liter of nitric acid in it. And what we'll do is we'll drip the acid slowly down into our reaction beaker here to form aqua regia. We're going to dissolve this pure gold bar. Throughout the dissolve sequence here, what I'll do is I'll be adding shots of hydrochloric acid to keep it hydrated. So when you're watching the time lapse and it jumps up, you'll know that that's me adding hydrochloric acid to rehydrate the reaction. So now what I'm going to do is put this on time lapse, and then we're going to start the nitric acid flow to form the aqua regia and dissolve our 51.5 troy ounce pure gold bar. Here we go. I started this process at about 11 o'clock on Monday. Today is Tuesday. And all I have left down there is a tiny sliver of the piece of gold, the brick of gold that I put in. It's almost completely dissolved. And now what we're going to do is we're going to, when all that gold goes into solution, what I'll do is evaporate this down to dryness to form chloroauric acid crystals. We'll put the time lapse back on and we'll continue this experiment. It's about 6:30 on Friday morning, and I've been working on this since Monday. You can see the chloroauric acid is beginning to crystallize in there. But it's taken a week to get, or 5 days to get to this point. And there's so much gold in there, it's not evaporating like I'd like it to, as quickly as I'd like it to. can see it's still liquid in there. And I've got a bunch of junk. It fell down into the dish here, so we're gonna replace this dish with a clean one and continue our experiment. We're gonna move this container off of here onto a clean container, and we're gonna take this down. This is just some stuff that dripped from the overhead down into this pan. I've got the new pan in place, and so now what we're going to do is go ahead and put it back on the time lapse. My goal is to evaporate this to dryness so that all I'm left with is solid chunks of orange chloroauric acid. Very close to being complete here. There's just a little bit of crust, a little bit of liquid left in there. The whole bottom of the beaker is got solid. Well, no, there's still liquid in there, I guess. So we're just gonna have to continue on until we get the rest of this liquid to form a solid chunk. This is it. I'm going to call it right here. I put a piece of paper up here to see if I was losing gold through the mist that's coming up out of there, and apparently there is some gold leaving the beaker as a fine atomized mist. So what we're going to do, I've been at this for 4 days and 4 hours. I started at 11 a.m. on Monday. Today is Friday and it's 3 p.m. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and turn the heat off and let this cool down naturally. Then we're going to get in there and see what we got. I've pulled it down off the heat. I'm just going to let it cool down to ambient temperature. We'll keep an eye on it as it cools. I've got a mason jar here, just a regular glass jar. Weighs 423.9 grams. And we'll write that right on the outside of the jar. 423.9. Had this thing down off the heat for a couple hours now, and it's still hot to the touch on the bottom of the beaker. Yeah, it's hot enough to where I can't really hold my hand down there for very long. So I think what we'll do here is we're gonna give it an ice bath to cool it off. I'm exhausted. I've been up all night for the last 4 nights babysitting this thing, off and on, all night long, for the last Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday night. And I'm starting to fall asleep just sitting in my chair. So I'm going to hurry this along just a little bit by adding some ice to this container. See if we can get this thing cooled off and get this experiment concluded. What I'm trying to do is demonstrate that we can hold our gold in this form indefinitely. We don't have to hold it in metallic form. And I don't believe that a metal detector would be able to detect this gold because it's a salt, gold chloride. So I'll go ahead, let this thing get cooled off, and then we'll go from there. I think we've got this cooled off now. What I'll do is go ahead and let's get this thing set up to where we can get this material out of our beaker now. I'll take this paper here. It's going to have a little bit of gold infused into it. I'll add that to my paper storage. Let me get down in here and see if I can break this stuff up. I got a plastic spoon here, and of course I cannot. It's hard as a rock. I've got a steel knife here. Let's see if we can kind of break this up with a knife. Oh jeez, it's flying everywhere. This is not going to be easy. I might end up breaking the beaker. I think what we're going to have to do is break this up into separate parts, make this a multi-part video. This will be part 1, and I'm just exhausted. I can't even think straight on what to do next. It's hard as concrete down in there, so I'm not quite sure what I need to do next to get this thing. I can't even think straight. I'm so tired. Been up working on this thing for 4 nights, up all hours of the night, checking on it. So we're going to call this a part 1, and we'll pick right up right here in part 2. Thank you for watching.